Today is Monday, August 24th, and for today we're just going to review some literary terms that you probably were introduced to when you were in elementary school for the most part. And so if they look familiar, that's a good thing. You should either open the Google Doc where you can fill in, actually, I think it's a Google slide where you can fill in these definitions. You can use paper pencil. You are responsible for knowing the definitions for these words as well as being able to apply them. So if you're more of a paper pencil type of person, please go ahead and feel free to use that. I did also in this assignment attach a Google slide where I've inserted text boxes so each of you can fill in your own definitions. And I would suggest putting the definitions in your own words. If you just use my words and you don't understand what they mean, then it might get tricky when you go to apply the terms to stories that we read. All right, so let's go ahead and begin with the word setting. So, anytime, whether it's a movie, a short story, whatever the case may be, and someone asks you to describe the setting, all they're asking you to do is to describe the time and place of the story's plot. Now, that doesn't have to just be one thing, right? A lot of stories take place in a variety of places across the United States, in different countries, whatever the case may be. So don't feel like that has to just be one answer. There can be many. Moving on, protagonist, and this was a word that I put in the warm up from the first day on Thursday when you got on, and a lot of you just missed it or didn't understand why the answer was what it was. So the protagonist, and I think when we're little, we're always told the protagonist is the good guy. You think pro, you think good. That definitely has a positive connotation. But a protagonist does not have to be the good guy. The protagonist is simply the main character in a story. And the main character, as we know, doesn't have to be a good guy. Is it typically? Absolutely. But it certainly does not have to be. So, protagonist is the character who most of the action revolves around. Okay. Moving on then to the antagonist. The antagonist is the character working against the main character. So let me type that in for you. And that can be the protagonist himself. If you're reading a book where perhaps a character is dealing with battling themselves through some kind of illness, whether that be physical, mental, whatever the case may be, they may be their own antagonist. An antagonist doesn't have to be a person, okay? So we should probably add in here character or thing working against the protagonist. So who or what is causing the protagonist problems throughout the story? That's going to be your antagonist. All right, moving on to suspense. So when we're thinking about the word suspense, we're thinking about feelings, right? You've probably all sat in a movie theater and kind of been leaning forward because you can't wait to see what's going to happen next, or gripping your armrest in your seat because it's such a tense moment. So, suspense is an intense feeling, an audience, and that could be an audience member in a theater, and it could be a reader of a story, goes through while waiting for the outcome. And there's the school bell in case you didn't know what that sounded like. Okay. So suspense is the intense feeling an audience goes through while waiting for the outcome of certain events. All right, so once again, it's that gripping the side rails, it's tensing up, it's all of those things. All right, flashback. Flashback is typically one that kids don't have much trouble with. It is an account of events that happened before the start of the plot. So basically what that means is the plot's going on. I might, start telling you a story about what happened, and the setting would be I was in my 20s and blah blah blah. And then I might insert a little story about something that happened in my childhood, right? That would be a flashback. For those of you who have seen the movie Forrest Gump, perhaps one of my favorites, um, Forrest is an adult at the beginning of that story, if you recall, right? He goes and he's going to sit on the park bench. He's going to see his longtime love, Jenny. And a nurse comes up and he notices her shoes. And he looks at her nursing shoes, and they're the big white ones, the big soles, super comfortable looking. And he says, "Oh, I like your shoes. I remember my first pair of shoes. Mama called them my magic shoes." And then we go into a flashback from when he was like 5 years old, getting braces on his legs. And so that's what a flashback is. That all those little flashbacks in the movie Forrest Gump, and if you haven't seen it, you need to. Um, they help us understand the current plot, which is why Forrest is going to see Jenny after all of these years and what he means, or excuse me, what she means to him and all of that. So we get the backstory. Okay. Foreshadowing then. Sometimes foreshadowing is hard to pick up on. It's the writer's use of hints to suggest what will happen later in the story. Okay, so writers' use of hints to suggest what will happen later in the story. A lot of times, if you're looking at it, especially a young adult novel, authors will end their chapters with, maybe we just read a chapter about a young lady named Jody getting bullied in school, and it was her sixth grade year, and they just described all of that. And then at the end of the chapter, they say, "Unfortunately, the bullying wasn't over in Jody's life." So then that's foreshadowing. We know she's going to experience more bullying as her educational years continue. If you think about any of the crime shows that are so popular right now, whether it's CSI, Criminal Minds, Law and Order, and any of the different variations of those shows, we watch along with the detectives as they're trying to solve these crimes. And sometimes there's foreshadowing, which we get that inclination of, oh, they did it because, right? So the creators of that show certainly do embed little hints. Those hints in literature are referred to as foreshadowing. Okay, now we're going to move on to the different portions of the plot graph. So these five different things: introduction, rising action, climax, falling action, and conclusion. If you remember from elementary school, middle school, it kind of looked like a mountain as far as the diagram goes of it. So I asked you to put these in order on the first warm up that I had you do on day one of school. And so I just want to make sure you guys understand what each part is and what is typically in each of these different parts. So first is the introduction. Another word for introduction is exposition. And typically in a story, this is where the setting and characters are introduced. All right, so we learn where, when the story is taking place, and we're usually introduced to our main character, our protagonist, at that point of time. Then we get to the rising action. Your rising action is going to be the majority of your story because that's where all the little things within the plot occur, which are leading to our climax, right? So there's a lot that happens. So rising action would be where the problem is introduced and begins, if I could type correctly, to grow. So we see all the things happening. The climax then. This is probably where I noticed many incorrect answers on the warm up from the first day. I think we're always taught that climax is the high point of the story, and that's typically true. But what if there are two really high points in a story and you can't figure out which one is the climax? Sometimes there's more than one exciting part of a story. So this is how you're going to figure it out. You need to ask yourself, when is the main problem resolved? When do I kind of know how the story's going to end? That's when your climax is, right? So your climax basically resolves whatever problem was happening in the story. So this is the point in the plot where the outcome becomes clear, comma, where the main problem is solved. Okay. If you have questions on that, please feel free to reach out. We'll work more with it as the next couple of weeks go on. So, climax, it's not just simply the high point. If you're wondering between two different high points, it's probably going to be the latter one, right? A lot of times, stories kind of end with a climax. Why would that be? Well, in today's day and age, especially with books and or movies, the creators of those, the authors, they want to um, leave themselves open to possibly do a sequel. And so if they've ended everything, well, there's really no point in doing a sequel. So a lot of times we end with the climax, and then we'll continue from there and build up to another climax and such and such. So authors today are certainly treating this plot graph a little differently than they did in years past. The falling action then is the aftermath of the settling of the conflict. I cannot type today. So basically, once the climax occurs, you think about the dust settling. What happens in the Rocky movies once Rocky defeats his foe? Right? Whether that was Mr. T, whether it was the Russian man that he battled, whether it was Apollo, who in any one of those movies, they specifically follow this plot graph, right? And so all the training and everything that Rocky did, all the bouts that he had leading up to the main guy he was hoping to fight, that's all rising action. What's the climax then? That's where he wins against his rival. And then the falling action would be everything that happens after that, like his wife running up into or climbing up into the ring and hugging him, the judges holding up his hands, everybody celebrating. All that stuff is all falling action. Okay. And then conclusion. And this is what I think a lot of stories and movies lack today, because they want to, once again, leave it open to have a sequel. So the conclusion, a lot of times there isn't one in a story. So the specific definition of a conclusion is that it points toward the future, meaning that I know Rocky and his wife lived happily ever after, and he held his title for however many years. Okay, that's looking into the future. That would be a conclusion. If you look at any of the children's, like Once Upon a Time stories that your parents may have read to you, or you may be now reading to your young siblings, a lot of times they end and they lived happily ever after. Well, that's looking into the future. That's telling me how they lived in years to come. That one line would be the conclusion. All right. So make sure you're real careful if I'm asking questions about a conclusion. There doesn't have to be one. All right. Internal conflict is the struggle within a character's mind. So internal conflict you can't necessarily see. Well, you can't usually see it. You might see someone's facial expressions, which may suggest that they're having an internal conflict, but we can't really see an internal conflict occurring. So an internal conflict could be anything happening within one's own mind. People who deal with any kind of mental illness, anxiety, depression, even people who are prejudiced, they can be going through an internal conflict, right? Fear. Anytime you are scared and trying to figure out what to do, that's an internal conflict. Um, People who struggle or are trying to quit drinking or quit smoking, right? That's a constant internal battle. I want a cigarette. No, I can't have one. So on and so forth. External conflict then are the struggle is a struggle we can see occurring between a character and an outside force. So that simply means, one person fighting, physically fighting another person or arguing with another person. A person battling against an animal, against nature. Let's say they're in a tornado or struggling against, I don't know, a big windstorm, something like that. So external conflicts, we can see them happening. All right. And then finally, theme. This is one I'm going to continue to talk about, to mention as the year goes on. Theme, when we think theme, and I think we get confused oftentimes because when you look the theme of something up, especially if you use Spark Notes or anything like that, a lot of times those types of sites will give you one word, right? Love, protection, um, faith, anything like that. But that's really in literature, and when we're in English class, that's not what your English teachers mean by theme. Those one word things are subjects. All right. So when we think theme, your mind should go directly to a life lesson. It should be a statement. And when I take means what I mean by statement is that it should be a full sentence. Okay, meaning it has a subject and it has a verb. It can stand alone. You can put a period at the end of it. Now, the other thing about theme is that it has to be universal, meaning that anyone who reads this story needs to be able to apply it to their life. Okay, so it is the message the author wants to get through to readers. So a lot of the go-to ones, like the grass isn't always greener on the other side, right? Or beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Things like that. I'm trying to think. Don't judge a book by its cover, right? Don't judge something by how it looks. Those are lessons that every person can apply to their lives because they're general enough that I can apply it in whatever way I want to my life. So a theme would never have something specific from the story. It would never have a character's name. It would never have a monster's name. It would never, let's say you were reading something about in Greek mythology, right? You would never say Poseidon is mean. You should be scared of him, all right? Because I'm not going to ever encounter Poseidon, right? And so it has to be something realistic that I can apply to my life right now in the year 2020. All right, so just think that, and we'll continue to work on that as we continue through our lessons. All right, hopefully you have gotten all these written. Obviously, you can now look back at this video anytime you want to copy kind of definitions down if you missed any of them. If you're someone who needs this document sent to you, please don't hesitate to call me or email me and let me know that, and I will gladly do it. But I do think there's something to be said for you writing and or typing the definitions on your own. And you may want to start with a blank sheet and see, after listening to this video, what you remember and what you can define on your own. Okay, because in tomorrow's lesson, we're going to actually read a story and you're going to apply these terms. So it's not just being able to match a word with its definition. That's more like elementary, things like that. Now we're looking more, when we think about our standards, we're really looking more into applying these terms. All right. So make sure you're familiar. If you don't understand one or more of them, please reach out and let me know. I'm here to help. And I will get back with you tomorrow with a story. Have a great day, guys.